Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Victoria, those of you who have traveled. My name is Philip Steenkamp, President and Vice Chancellor of Royal Roads University. I really want to thank you for being with us tonight. And to start our evening in a good way, I want to acknowledge our presence here on the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees, and Esquimalt nations. And I want to thank our media sponsor, the Times Colonist. It is indeed a great pleasure for us to gather here tonight. Our Changemakers Speakers Series brings the important conversations that happen at Royal Roads to you in downtown Victoria. Royal Roads University is Canada's university for changemakers, and we are committed to exploring the complex challenges of our time, and in particular, what we can do to address them. And tonight will be no exception. Tonight we will be hearing from author John Vaillant. And John, it's a great pleasure to have you here. John is a best-selling author and a freelance writer. He's published in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Walrus, among other publications. His book, The Golden Spruce, won the Governor General's and Writers' Trust Awards for nonfiction. His second book, The Tiger, won the BC Achievement Award for nonfiction and is published, I believe, in 16 languages. He also won the Wyndham Campbell Prize, a global award for nonfiction, and wrote the novel The Jaguar's Children. He was recently named to Maclean's magazine's Power List in the climate category. Fire Weather, his latest book, is a national bestseller, winning numerous awards and accolades, including being named one of the 10 best books of 2023 by the New York Times. It was the winner of the UK's famed Baillie Gifford Prize and has been named a finalist for the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for Political Writing and selected as a finalist in the BC Yukon Nonfiction Prize. Interestingly, it was also recently optioned for film by the Academy Award winning producers of the film Coda. Congratulations. But most importantly, the book holds language we need for our times. And tonight, John will share with us insights from Fire Weather and how we can respond to the challenge of unimagined extremes and whipsawing instability. So please join me tonight in welcoming John Vaillant.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Really good to be with you, to be back in Victoria. Victoria has always treated me quite gently and generously, so I was quite happy getting on the plane this morning and heading your way. And I heard that Harbour Air they're aiming for a fleet of 50 electric airplanes, which that is really amazing. Totally pioneering. And a number of the people who are the reason I'm here are in this room. I'm really grateful to you. I understand, heard some of the names of other Changemakers speakers, and I have some deep footprints to follow in. So I'm going to do my best, and I'm honestly going to go as quickly as I can because I've got a lot to cover. So off we go without further ado. I spent the last 7 years researching fire weather because it was clear to me that climate disruption, of which fire is just one manifestation, is the issue of our time. It's an atmospheric issue, it's an environmental issue, it's a political issue, it's an energy issue, it's an infrastructure issue, it's a climate justice issue. Climate disruption will impact every aspect of our lives for the rest of our lives. If there was ever any doubt that this was so, last summer settled it. We've all seen the smoke, too many of us have seen the fire, and it's not just Canada. Things feel different now. Weather is different now, and fire is different now. The Earth's expressions are intensifying and accelerating. The American writer Ernest Hemingway wrote a novel almost exactly 100 years ago called The Sun Also Rises, and there are a couple of lines in it that have been on my mind lately. How did you go bankrupt? Bill asked. 2 ways, Mike said. Gradually, and then suddenly. This applies equally well to the last 50 years of observed and tracked climatic changes. We know the air is getting hotter because we can feel it. The heat dome of 2021 that broke records day after day and killed nearly 700 British Columbians is still a raw memory for many of us. And so is the atmospheric river that inundated the Fraser Valley. What appears to be happening now is a non-linear acceleration. Radical extremes are being felt all over the world. Look at any metric of planetary distress. So this is global surface air temperatures. I've got other different media coming up, but the darker the blue, the cooler it is, and you can see on the right the dates going back to the 1940s, and you can see it slowly warming, creeping upward, and then look at 2023 just kind of leaping off by itself. 2024 is doing the same thing, and we're just getting started. Here again, these are JFM, I believe refers to winter sea surface temperatures. These are anomalies, but again, look at 2024 and just these spikes that just seem almost unrelated to what's gone before. Antarctic sea ice anomalies, again, 2023, one of the lowest on record. So we're in this period of discontinuity. Alex Steffen is a wonderful futurist working out of Berkeley, California. I think he coined this term. It's an event or situation wherein past experience ceases to be a useful guide to future problem solving. So we can't do it the way we used to do it. And where we're really seeing people banging up against this is in firefighting. I didn't know what FRP was till last summer. And FRP is fire radiative power. It's the raw energy coming off the fire front. And a guy named Neil Leroux out of the University of Nevada, using satellite data, kind of collating it, measured how much energy came out of the Canadian fires during the fire season of 2023. And you look at this rainbow of lines down at the bottom right, those are previous years. Things tend to really pick up in June or July, but look at 2023 and look at May. It's like someone just tied a balloon to it and let it go. And so that number is 42 terawatts. And normally, FRP is measured in megawatts. A megawatt is 1,000,000 watts. A terawatt is 1,000,000,000,000 watts. It's a whole nother magnitude of energy. 42 trillion watts is what you power Tokyo with, or power New York City with. This is, again, someone tied a balloon to this one too. These are burn areas. It's now actually the final tally for 2023, I think, was around 18 million hectares. So that is basically Oklahoma or Uruguay or Florida. Massive, massive areas. Again, in the lower right, you can sort of see in these also-rans, these amateurs, of previous years. These are emissions. This is for Canada. The gray, the orange you can see is emissions, CO2 emissions from wildfire, and it fluctuates as you would imagine it. And then there's 2023, which we're on some other kind of graph here. There's something, are you measuring it differently? Are you calculating it differently? Or is it just that much bigger? What's in some ways more significant is there's no fluctuation in Canadian industrial emissions. Those gray lines are almost constant. And that is different from any other G7 country, I'll tell you that. So this is another way to measure where we're at. This is also new. We had 250,000 Canadians on the road last summer due to fire. They were run out of their homes by fire, with tens of thousands more on standby, unsure. Am I going to have to leave tonight? Am I going to have to leave tomorrow? What about my job? What about my kids? What about my house? And when you're evacuating Yellowknife, You got 1,500 kilometers to go before you get to another city with services like Edmonton or Fort McMurray, and a lot can happen to an elder with a kidney problem in 1,500 kilometers of wilderness driving. And you could also just get a flat tire. You know, it can almost create more hazards. So I've done a few keynotes for the Red Cross, and Conrad Sauvé, the CEO of Red Cross Canada, told me something really that kind of brought this home more graphically than any of these stats. He said he started with them, I think, about 15 years ago. And he said, when I started working for the Red Cross, about 80% of our work was outside Canada. And that's what you'd expect. Canada is the stable, safe place that sends blue hats and Red Crosses out to help other people, because other people live in war-torn, climate-torn, disaster zones, and we go and help them. Now, according to Conrad Sauvé, 80% of the Red Cross Canada's work is inside Canada. So our country has changed in a lot of ways. So we're not used to this, we're not ready for it, physically or mentally. And I want to emphasize that this is not a new normal, because a new normal implies some kind of new plateau. This is clima incognita. This is the unknown climate. In February, more than 200 people were killed in the wildfires that burned around Valparaiso, Chile. That's a record for the modern era, as far as I know. Just yesterday, 175 convicts were evacuated in Alberta due to wildfire. It's only April. There were evacuations in BC too. It is only April. Thomas Smith, an environmental geographer at the London School of Economics, summed it up this way: I'm not aware of a similar period when all parts of the climate system were in record-breaking or abnormal territory. So we've supercharged the system. Now the Earth has a fever. We're all feeling it in different ways. And so it's an extraordinary epochal moment we find ourselves in. Never before have technology, culture, and nature been moving so quickly simultaneously. One reason it's so shocking is because we're used to being the stars of the show. Historically, it's been humans who've outpaced the natural world, leaving from arrowheads to AI. Our species has progressed steadily faster than geologic time, leaving indelible marks as we go. But now, geologic time, climate time, atmospheric time is moving as fast, in some cases faster, than we are. Faster than technology, faster than history. The world we thought we knew is changing under our feet because we changed it. So I first began to understand the implications of this acceleration when Fort McMurray caught on fire in May 2016. Fort McMurray, Alberta, it turns out, is an instructive place to try to make sense of these rapid changes. It's also a good place to learn about fire and petroleum and how they fuel the volatile and all-consuming appetites of petrocapitalism. There are a couple of pieces to this, and I'm going to go through them in the order that I first explored them. And I'm going to start with the fire. If you live in Canada, here's a term you need to know. We call it the WUI, the wildland-urban interface. It's where the built environment butts up against wild lands. Victoria has WUI communities in it. The west end of Vancouver is, you could say, a WUI community because Stanley Park is right there. So forests are also taking on a new meaning, and I think that's really difficult for Northern Hemisphere people. It's really difficult for Canadians. The forest is where we go to recharge and repair and reconnect. And now there's this other hazard, this other liability in it. And we're drawn to it naturally. It's a healthy, ancient impulse to go into it. And yet it feels like something else is waiting there. So this is the view from Fire Hall 5 in Fort McMurray at 6 p.m. on May 2nd. So you can tell if you know fire, those dark coils, black spruce is burning or houses are burning. In this case, it's forest. No big deal outside Fort McMurray. Lots of fires out there every year. That one has a lot of energy in it. So much energy that even when it first popped up, they jumped on it. They could not subdue it. So now this fire, it's only 24 hours old, and it is really honking. But it's still safely far away. So I'm going to read a brief excerpt from Fire Weather that follows on here. In Fort McMurray, May 3rd began differently for everyone, but it ended the same. For Chandra Linder, it began with a rite of spring. Linder was a labor relations advisor who worked for Syncrude. Linder's husband, Corey, an engineer, was employed there too, and so were many of their friends. Blonde, with a pixie cut, Linder is fit and warm and does not suffer fools. It makes sense once you get to know her, but to an outsider, it might be surprising to see someone so polished and female in such a remote, industry-oriented, testosterone-heavy place. So the gender ratio up there, some of you have probably read Ducks by Kate Beaton. If you haven't, you have an intense experience in store. But the gender ratio is about 25 to 1, men to women. And so there's this kind of overdetermined energy up there that is, I think, really hard to be in. So for work, Linder dresses accordingly. Minimal makeup, high collars, dark pants, no heels. Clothes suitable for climbing in and out of trucks and SUVs, for working in a world of working men. Linder had seen the smoke plume southwest of town because everyone had seen it. A wind-swept cauliflower of billowing grays and browns that appeared to have sprouted full-blown from the forest on Sunday afternoon. It had been growing since then, but it was still miles away, and it wasn't the only one. Over the weekend, the Linders had hosted friends evacuated due to another fire. It was almost a lark. They took photos of the big plume developing across the river the same way one would a sunset or a rainbow. Their friends went home the next day because forestry was on it. Boots were on the ground. Water bombers were in the air. As far as the Linders were concerned, whatever was out there was being handled because that's what people do in Fort McMurray. They handle things. Certainly, the beginning of May was a little early for fires. There were still car-sized blocks of winter ice on the riverbanks, and some of the local lakes had yet to thaw. But otherwise, this was nothing new. Fires cloud the horizon every spring and summer up here. As Chandra and Corey Linder said, practically in unison, it happens every year. Given the unseasonable heat, it was 33 Celsius, and the fact that 5 separate wildfires had ignited around the city that weekend, it's hard to overstate how unconcerned was Fort McMurray's citizenry. But if you were up at dawn on May 3rd, as Chandra Linder was, and you'd seen the sky so full of summer promise as she had, you might understand why. The brilliance of that morning was so exceptional that after her morning shower, Linder did something she hadn't done in a long time. She pulled out her favorite navy blue suit with the skirt, picked some medium heels to go with it, and left her socks in the drawer. Thus attired, she headed off to work in Syncrude's head office. In her garage, there were a few vehicles to choose from, and in keeping with her outfit and her mood, Linder picked the car she calls the little one, a black Porsche that hadn't seen daylight in 6 months. So there was a national census in 2016, and the median household income in Fort McMurray was $200,000 a year. So I think you got to go to Marin County or Westchester or somewhere to find that again. Winters are long and dark in Fort McMurray, but this one was over. Spring was here, and Linder felt as beautiful and as hopeful as the day. So now we're going to jump forward, same day, May 3rd. We're going to jump maybe 4 hours. Still feeling the symptoms of spring fever, Chandra Linder knocked off work at lunch and organized herself for a 2 o'clock meeting at Syncrude's downtown office in the Borealis building. With no traffic, it's a 30-minute drive down the highway. Still 20 kilometers north of downtown, she was rounding a long, gradual bend in the river when her windshield filled with something she did not recognize. When I got that first view of it, said Linder, I went, hang on a second. It was clear overhead, but to the south, it was black. Black smoke with streaks of red in it. It took up the whole sky. I'm trying to make sense of this thing. I'm thinking, maybe it just looks closer than it is. I'm thinking maybe the red is the sun shining through the smoke. But it's not the sun. It's in the wrong place. And then I realize it's flame. Linder had seen a lot of fire plumes, but this didn't look like any of them. So I pull over to the side of the highway and I call my guy Byron and I say, are we having this meeting? And he's like, no, we're not having this meeting. Don't come in. And I'm like, I'm looking at a wall of flames here. It was a short call, in part because no one was quite sure what to say next. What do you say on a beautiful day when the city where you live and conduct business appears to be on fire? After hanging up, Linder continued on to her exit, where she turned west, back up the hill and out of the river valley. Okay, she said, not right, but here's what I do. I'm going to go home anyway. I drive past the dry cleaners. Well, I'm going to drop off my stuff at Sam's place, because in my mind, the fire's still on the other side of the river downtown. So I'm dropping my stuff off, and this guy comes in from the golf course in full golf apparel, and he's like, holy shit, we just got evacuated from the golf course. And I'm like, well, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm here to pick up my dry cleaning. And I said, what golf course were you on? Because we have 2 in town. And he says, Thickwood, meaning the fire had just jumped the river. The Athabasca River by the Thickwood Golf Course is 0.5 kilometer wide. So, continued Linder, Sam, the dry cleaner, who's our buddy, is on the phone to his wife. Honey, it just jumped the river. Get out, get out, get out. In all this craziness, Sam still takes my dry cleaning, and he's like, Tuesday good? And I'm like, yeah, next Tuesday's great. So at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on May 3rd, Linder tucked her laundry ticket safely in her wallet and aimed the Porsche for home. So that was 2 o'clock, and this is 2:45. So, gradually, and then suddenly. So, this photo was taken by a guy named Paul Earst, and you can see him, he's shooting over his dashboard. That's the hood of his truck reflected. These are fireballs rolling over the road. What happens, what fire's engaging with are the gases, the heat. The heat is to release the gases, and the ignition then follows. So in front of him is his wife and his daughter in separate vehicles. And I mean, I don't know how anybody lived through that, really. A deer on fire smashed into his car. And I asked him, I said, did you happen to notice the temperature on your dashboard thermometer? And he said, I did notice it. He said it was 66 Celsius. So what's going on out there, though, so radiant heat, it's the heat that tells you not to touch the candle. It's the heat that's coming off the flames. The heat coming out of that wall of fire that came into Fort McMurray from the southwest was 500 Celsius. So it's hotter than the planet Venus. And there's nothing on Venus, and people don't go there. So now this heat is projecting into the forest, and what that does is it desiccates everything instantly, and then it heats it up to combustive temperatures. And again, what fire wants to interact with is not solid objects. It heats things up so that they begin to vaporize whatever hydrocarbons are available. And there's a lot of hydrocarbons in black spruce. There's a lot of hydrocarbons in a truck tire. There's a lot of hydrocarbons in a tar shingled roof, in a vinyl siding, in a plastic swing set. And so you have to imagine, we see fire over here. What the fire is seeing is this delicious cloud of flammable gas that it can go engage with instantly. And this is why houses in Fort McMurray burnt to the basement in 5 minutes. And that's not, so no one's seen that. Firefighters had not seen that. And when they were telling me they'd seen that, I thought, it's adrenaline, you're talking to a journalist, whatever. And then I talked to other firefighters around the city, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. And I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, from a house that is standing there completely uninvolved with fire to flames in the basement. And these are $500,000, $750,000 houses, 2 stories tall, kind of, state of the art. So this is 21st century fire. It's a term that I coined for the book because fire is behaving differently now. And it's that gradually and then suddenly. Everybody I interviewed for this book, Australia, California, Alberta, everybody, the common theme was, I can't believe how fast it moved. And that's what you raise the heat and drop the humidity, and you basically create this bigger space in a way for fire to operate in. It sort of got more elbow room. And the relative humidity in Fort McMurray on May 3rd was 11 or 12%, depending on which station you get your readings from. I don't know what that means. Sounds dry, 11% humidity. So I went looking around for where 11% humidity is normal. 11% humidity is normal in Death Valley in the month of July. So now you have desertic humidity in the boreal forest, which is already a flammable system, and you have a record-breaking temperature for that date that broke the record by, I think, 5 or 7 Celsius for May 3rd, 33 Celsius, 11%. And you may not be able to do the math, but the fire can do the math. And it does ferocious things. And so the firefighters, I kept thinking about 9/11, and I kept thinking about the firefighters going up the Twin Towers. They're on fire. They have never dealt with a building this tall. They've never dealt with a fire that big. It doesn't feel right. They never trained for this one, but they're going because they're duty-bound to go, because there are people up there. Well, that's what Fort McMurray firefighters did too. They went up into those neighborhoods that were immolating, and they really were so naive. I was talking to a firefighter from Slave Lake who'd been through this, and he was saying, yeah, we'll get it. The fire might take 10 houses, but we'll get it. And the fire really had different plans. And this happened in California, and firefighters told me this. One thing they said to me was, we got our ass handed to us. And these are, type A competitive people. And they're team-oriented, they're scrappy, they go in there and they kick ass. That's what they do. That's what firefighters do. And they're not used to, normal house fire. You might lose the house, but you are going to beat the fire. Ultimately, you will beat the fire. That's not what happened here. And so what I kept hearing was the firefighting operation turned into a life-saving operation. So that's how different fire is now. That's the discontinuity for firefighters. They go in there equipped to fight a 1990s fire, and they're met with a 21st century fire. I kept thinking of prison guards running into a cell to get some big burly convict, and inside instead is a gorilla who proceeds to just redecorate the cell with these wardens. And that's kind of what happened. So this is an interesting picture. This is what 21st century fire does. So this is a picture only a firefighter could have taken. This is a very powerful fire hose that if it was aimed at you, would blow you out of your chairs and knock down the door. A lot of velocity and power there. But look what's happening. So basically, this is the Prospect neighborhood. This is, by the way, 2 days into the fire. It's May 5th now. So this fire has been raging in the city day and night for days, and it would continue to do so. So they're in the process of losing this neighborhood, and they've lost the core of it. They're trying to save these outer houses by wetting them down. But you see there's so much energy in that fire that as this very powerful jet of water goes up into the air, you can see it bending up there. It's bending because there's so much upward turning, ferocious chimney-like heat that it's basically vaporizing the water, this very powerful hose, and sucking it up into the fire column. And the next time those firefighters are going to see that water is after it's gone 30,000 feet up into the stratosphere, frozen, coalesced around little cinders and ashes from burnt houses and trees, and come back to earth as black hail. It's biblical. You know, these are things and this is a pyrocumulonimbus firestorm. These were really real curiosities back in the 90s. You didn't see them very often. Where you normally would see one was over a volcano, that, churning, royal, with lightning in it that goes up into the stratosphere. We've seen that. We've seen it in apocalyptic images from ancient tales, from the Bible. Well, now wildfires are starting to generate these pyrocumulonimbus systems. And Fort McMurray's went 45,000 feet into the stratosphere. And that was a big deal, and that was frightening and alarming. And because they can generate their own lightning, they become kind of perpetual motion machines because they can start fires 20 miles away. And they're turning kind of the way hurricanes turn. The Coriolis effect impacts them. They're massive, massive entities that basically will last as long as there's fuel. And so again, we saw all those balloon-like graph lines from 2023. The nation of Canada, by itself, in 2023, generated 142 pyro-CBs across the country. And that is unheard of in human history. It's never happened. And Canada, punching above its weight, did it all by itself. So they had to resort to unusual methods to fight this fire. And what they ultimately decided to do with that neighborhood was tear down all the standing houses. They cut a fire break with heavy machinery through the houses. They took all the F-150s, like the ones parked in front of the Empress right now, and they plowed them through the walls of the houses into the basements, because trucks blow up too, and they didn't want these bombs sitting around in the street. They plowed them through the walls of the houses, they tore the houses down on top of them, and then they hosed them down. And so these heavy equipment operators whom I interviewed, they know who lives in these houses. They're tearing their friends' and neighbors' houses down. So that's Fort McMurray, seen. I'm pretty sure this was taken from Fort Mackay. It's like 30 kilometers north. And a lot of people said they'd pull over, maybe because they ran out of gas. And they're looking back, and they said it just looked like a nuke had gone off. So it's a very It's just a different class of energy, but it is now a class of energy that is not uncommon to see, and Canada can generate it without much difficulty now. Another characteristic of 21st century fires is that it rages all night, and historically fires wouldn't go out at night, but they would settle. And firefighters would get a rest. They know the fire's there, but it wouldn't be actively spreading. Now it's actively spreading. So these firefighters, they get no rest. They're up for 24 hours. They're up for 42, 48 hours. They're up for 56 hours. They're operating heavy machinery. They're doing their duty. And there's nothing to tell them to stop, because it's not stopping. And what they're trained for is more episodic battles. But they're not supposed to just go on and on and on. And wildfires, that's a different regime. They're fought a different way. But when it's property and human life, you go hard until it's over. And it never ended. So in 2016, this was a shocking sight. We'd only seen it before, really, in the Okanagan fire of 2003, Slave Lake. But here in Fort McMurray, we saw neighborhood after neighborhood. Well, now, we're only 8 years past, but think how many times we've seen this image, whether it's in Lahaina or in Valparaiso or in Halifax or in Marshall, Colorado, or any number of other places in Spain, Greece, Portugal, Russia. So, and again, this is not what normal house fires do. We've all seen a normal house fire. They don't look like this. So that's one kind of ruin. This is another kind of ruin, just north. This is the Syncrude upgrader with its mines in the foreground. The scale is really hard to wrap your head around. So these things that look like little sheds, these are T797 hauler trucks. They weigh 400 tons empty. Their tires are 13 feet tall. They weigh 6 tons apiece. They catch on fire from the friction of the loads. And so when they're burning, they'll blow up like a bomb, and they'll behave like a bomb. So you have to evacuate the area and then shoot the tire with a rifle to deflate it. So those big white patches up on the right, they're ziggurats, really, of sulfur. And they are, by volume, bigger than the pyramids at Giza. Long before we split the atom, we were tampering with the wizard's book of spells. We wanted fire's fierce energy in a bottle, a barrel, a pipeline, and we got it. Energy to burn, energy to power the world and generate wealth beyond our wildest dreams. So we've come a long way since I was born. This article, this is an ad from Life magazine, a very popular weekly from the States, 1962. Each day, Humble, a subsidiary of Exxon, Imperial, Standard, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same. Each day, Humble supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier. And ain't that great? And when it was really a different consciousness back then. And there are people probably even older than me in this room who remember, when it was really a virtue. And we've really had to rethink that. And this is an interesting graph, 1990 through projecting through 2030. These are G7 countries. This is where we don't see, there's only one balloon string graph. All the other lines are going down. These are CO2 emissions by country. And so a lot of people peaked between 1990 and 2010, but one of them just kept on going, just couldn't stop, and that is Canada. And Canada's really an outlier in the G7. Canada, based on its behavior, is a lot more like a Venezuela or a Russia in terms of its focus on burning and burning. But as big oil supercharges our economy and its own bottom line with record profits, it's also supercharging our atmosphere with record quantities of greenhouse gases. CO2 levels are now fully 50% higher than they were in pre-industrial times. And again, this is going back again to basically my birth. We start in the late 50s, heading up into the present day. We see these milestones. And CO2, I mean, too bad it wasn't a stock we could all invest in. Wait. If you're in petroleum. But so Edward Teller, at the time, one of the greatest living physicists, considered the father of the hydrogen bomb, he gave a very sobering talk at Columbia University, talking to these oil magnates and bankers about the power of CO2, which they seem to know nothing about. And Robert Dunlop, the father of Suncor, was at that meeting. So he got the memo, but he went ahead anyway. Carbon dioxide is accumulating in our atmosphere about 100 times faster than in pre-industrial times. These heat-trapping gases have skewed our climate in easily measurable ways. All you really need is a thermometer and a calendar. So this is 1850, running through again to just last year. And so, we had a relatively cool period. You see the temperature variation. It's quite subtle variations. And it's trundling along. We get a little spike during World War II, up and down, up and down, up and down. Again, a little when a bunch of you were just born, or maybe you were having children already. It starts to climb, but erratically. And then, now we're really into this new regime. And again, look at 2023. Look at how different it is. It's really, really shocking. And a lot of people are scratching their heads over this. So one thing we need to be clear on as we look at this is that coal is an 18th century fuel. Oil, which still drives about 80% of the world's economy, is a 19th century fuel. The internal combustion engine was prototyped in 1860. Standard Oil, Exxon, Imperial, Humble, whatever you want to call it, was founded in 1870. Bitumen is not a fuel at all. It's a driveway sealer, and yet that is what unbelievable amounts of natural gas are used to melt and fractionate up in Fort McMurray, and basically pummeling it, beating it into submission so it vaguely resembles a petroleum product that can be sold in southern markets. In ancient times, it was used as mortar to stick bricks together. In Alberta, Dene people used it to seal their canoes. It takes billions of cubic feet of natural gas every day to melt and fractionate bitumen into substances southern petroleum markets will want to buy. So why on earth are we still doing this, especially when scientists understood the basics of the greenhouse effect literally since the 18th century? We've understood the heat-retaining qualities of CO2 since the 1850s. Scientists were speculating on industrial CO2's potential for altering the climate in the 1890s. Evidence that this was happening was visible by the 1930s. So the only reason we labor so hard to liberate coal, oil, and gas from the ground is so we can burn it. In other words, if you're in the petroleum industry, or interacting with it, you're in the fire industry, which means you're in the CO2 industry, which means you're in the climate-changing industry. What's alarming, and possibly indictable, is the fact that petroleum companies have known this for 50 years. In fact, they've been leaders in climate science. So this graph came from an internal memo, for chosen eyes only. This is basically 1970s science being gathered together. Exxon, biggest, richest company in the world back in the 80s. CO2 was on the radar. Scientists were concerned about it. And Exxon scientists very earnestly thought, okay, well, we know we generate CO2. Let's see what the implications of CO2 are for our industry. So they tracked it back to 1850, found a baseline, and then that broad horizontal arrow projecting out to 2150 is what they predicted the climate would look like without the intrusion, without the addition of industrial CO2. That other arrow that starts to take off right around 2000 and heads northwest, heads up, is their prediction from the 1970s of where our climate would go if we kept using fossil fuels and expanding as people predicted they would expand at that time in history. So this is 40 years ago, and they nailed it. I mean, Exxon is a huge, wealthy company. They could hire the best scientists. They got good scientists. The scientists produced some really good data, and they knew. Exxon knew. So this presents a quandary. How do you separate oil from fire or burning from emissions? You can't. And so starting in the 1980s, the industry, along with its allies in government, in churches, in finance, in the media, embarked on a disinformation campaign to disavow and undermine their own science. And they've been doing it ever since. And when they're called on this, they try greenwashing. When they're called on that, they come out, they actually are more honest, which is what's happening now. I'll be talking about that in a second. But so now in 2024, we still find ourselves, in this untenable contradiction. So this is Suncor's mission statement. This is not picking on Suncor. This is just one oil company. Our purpose is to provide trusted energy that enhances people's lives while caring for each other and the earth. That's awesome. I want to work for a company like that. I want to buy that company's product. They got a new CEO named Rich Kruger, and it turns out he'd been with Exxon for about 30 years. He would have seen that memo that I just showed you with the graph. And this is what he said in public. He said, we're in the business to make money and as much of it as possible. And by the way, workers, you better watch your back because you better be productive or you're going to be out of here. So again, I'm not singling out Suncor. This is an example of what every petroleum CEO has told the press in the past year. They basically said the money's too good. I've got to wrap it up here. So my question is, how is this okay? How is it that the fossil fuel industry, the planet's biggest contributor of carbon emissions, along with the banks that finance it, the institutions that invest in it, and the governments that subsidize it, gets a pass? Not just from responsibility, but even from accountability to the laws of chemistry and physics. Why do they do that? This is another term coined by Alex Steffen, that futurist from down in California. Predatory delay, the deliberate slowing of change to prolong a profitable but unsustainable status quo whose costs will be paid by others. We're living in that act of predatory delay. We spent 40 years in this ongoing horror show of predatory delay. John Kenneth Galbraith, the U.S. economist, ambassador, and author, born in Canada, wrote, "People of privilege will risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage." So I think that derives from a reflexive allegiance to the status quo, but I also think of Chandra Linder. The city's on fire, but I still want to do my dry cleaning. Not because I'm bad, not because I'm selfish, not because I'm dumb. I had a plan for my day. And that plan might be to mine for copper. That plan might be to get a master's degree. That plan might be to gather in this really beautiful building. Most of us have plans for our day and for our lives, and they don't include climate change. But it took me 7 years to figure this out. But the petroleum industry is a wholly owned subsidiary of fire. And our devotion to this energy that has enhanced our lives in extraordinary ways, enriched us, empowered us. It's a long list of benefits. It's also enabled fire to burn more broadly, more intensely than it ever has in human history. So we're engaged in that right now. And how do we show our gratitude for fire and for petroleum while disengaging from it, which we have to do? I'm noticing the time. And so I'm going to jump ahead. Right now, as petroleum companies have said quite openly, we are choosing profits over people. Take it or leave it. Our shareholders are happy. But the earth is telling us by every means available that we need to transition away from carbon-intensive energy as fast as possible. And so we're in this tension right now. And I think a lot of times, and I was talking to people earlier, it feels really futile. It feels really frustrating. It feels like we're going in the wrong direction. And I think there's some provinces around us where we really feel that from leadership. A lot of people want to live differently. And something to consider is this. This is the surge in lawsuits against petroleum companies around climate deception. So this is from the journal Nature. They started around 2005, and they just haven't been able to keep, the data is not up to date, but that number is going up. Orange is United States, blue is other countries. More than a quarter of Americans now live in states and municipalities suing companies over their climate deception. So, and I think, this is hard information to take in. A lot of it is really quite gloomy, but in terms of people are wanting this different reality, and we're actually starting to see the needle move. 1 in 5 vehicles sold worldwide last November were electric. The world's 4th and 5th largest economies, Germany and California, both get more than 50% of electricity from renewables now. California, I don't know if you've been watching California over the past week. I'm sure you all have. It's so charismatic. But they have, with wind and solar, have been generating 150% of their energy needs. This is a country of 40 million, same population as Canada. So it kind of makes you wonder if they can do it. Uruguay ran on renewables for 5 months last year. The state of South Dakota, that bastion of radical liberalism and tree hugging, they're at about 96.9% renewables, mostly wind, for their electricity. South Africa's Northern Cape was at about 100%. About half of Portugal's electricity is now generated by renewable energy. This is a really important word. Well, it's an important word to me, and I want to share it with you. Revirescence. It means to revitalize, regenerate, regrow. This is what the earth wants you to do, wants to do for itself. Growing, flourishing is the earth's default mode. After the fire passes over, and remember I told you about the fire, 500 Celsius, trees immolating and houses burning down in 5 minutes. This is what comes up. This was taken by an assurance adjuster about 5 weeks after the fire. You can see the wreckage behind him. Those bulbs are only about 6 inches under the ground. And so I really took heart from that. And the message I got this defiance from those tulips. I got sort of, do your worst to me, and I will still return in beauty. And, Tupac Shakur has another way of saying that. But they mean the same thing, and it's this really wonderful, defiant power. So I find a teaching in that. Those tender bulbs planted by human hands ended up being the most durable part of that neighborhood. And I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you very, very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, I'm glad you left us with a little bit of hope at the end there, John, because the rest of it was quite terrifying. We do have an opportunity now for some conversation, and we have collected questions from the audience. And if you have questions now, you can also admit them by using this QR code on the screen behind me. It will take you to a form where you can drop in your question. We'll also have roving mics in a moment, so you can put up your hands as well. And maybe I'll just begin with a question, John. And that is, when you spoke to people in Fort McMurray after this, did they make the connection between the fire and the industry they work in?
No. No, and I didn't press them on it either. I mean, they'd been through enough, I felt, and it didn't feel fruitful. Yeah. I had to leave a lot of my own baggage back in Vancouver. And I really just went there to see where they led me. And climate did not come up. And I just think it's too petroleum, that industry gave them everything they had. So to turn around and criticize it, It's a really hard thing to do. Upton Sinclair, I think he said it's, excuse me, I wish I had a better memory for these kind of quotes, but it's basically, it's hard to get a man to understand something that his job depends on him not understanding. And so it's not because they're dumb. It's not because they're asleep. I think they know what's up, but they also know what's at stake for them, which is if you're coming from a moribund economy in some other part of the country, and this is your meal ticket, this is what enabled you to, give your wife what she wanted, raise your kids in the way that you weren't raised, the way that you wanted to raise them. It's hard to fault somebody wanting to do that. And so, and you also have a government that is, where climate is a no-go topic, kind of like Texas, kind of like Florida. So it's a really strange kind of willful blindness that is, again, captive to petroleum, captive to fire. And it really comes back to this dazzling energy that is, but it's really quite a primitive energy and quite a destructive energy. And we're obviously capable of something much more refined and sustainable, but we're in a period of cultural and intellectual and evolutionary transition, I think, as a species. So it's an amazing time to be alive.
That's one way to put it. John, I found those 2023 figures incredible. And as you say, they are completely anomalous. It's not a new normal. I mean, this is just some huge signal. And yet, in this country, right now, politically across the country, there's huge opposition to the carbon tax, likely a new federal government within 18 months or so, which is, the opposition going to campaign on axe the tax.
Yeah.
So I guess the broad question is, what will it take? I mean, we had the unprecedented fire season last year, including in the East. It wasn't just in the West. It was extreme in the East. So back to your Galbraith quote, I mean, does it take our destruction before we actually do anything about this?
I think it might. I think a lot of us thought, wow, as people go through these climate traumas, these new extremes, fire, tornadoes, or unprecedented floods, they'll join our team, they'll get on board. And that isn't what happens. They just want their lives back. And my guess is if you got burned out or flooded out or blown out, mostly what you'd be focusing on is, my kid's traumatized now. There are a whole lot of people in Fort McMurray who have PTSD. There are a whole lot of people who have PTSD from this fire summer of 2023 who did not have it prior. And so, think of victims of gun violence in the United States. Very few of them become anti-gun activists. Most of them are like, I'm just trying to get my elbow to bend again. I'm just trying to be able to sleep through the night. I'm just trying to not freak out before I go back to school. These are chunks of the population that I think are almost often kind of sidelined. And then there's the very occasional person who will sort of transcend somehow or metabolize that trauma into action. But that is not the norm. And I haven't really seen any evidence of it, particularly in Alberta. And they're going to have a heck of a summer coming. And so those bulwarks that we build against the obvious are, we have incredibly powerful minds, for better and worse. And so what's it going to take? I think it's going to take the US, China, and the EU not needing bitumen anymore and moving on with the energy transition. I mean, it is underway now. And it's not going to be a beautiful, linear, elegant transition. You see what's happening with LNG and here, and we've got a really bumpy couple of decades coming up. But the needle is absolutely moving through these lawsuits. Like, look at the justice being brought to Trump, and look how long it's taken, and look how much damage he does along the way. That's an analogy for what's going to happen with the petroleum transition, I think. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, but it's going to be rough. That's, you know, what do I know, really? But it's, you know, that's sort of all I think about.
Okay, we are going to take questions. I would ask you to keep your questions really brief because we've only got about 15 minutes here, and it'd be nice to get as many questions as we can from the floor. I'm also going to take questions which have been collected, but we'll begin on the floor here. Thank you. So please just raise your hand and somebody will move.
There's a guy. There's a fellow right there.
Yeah.
J'aimerais commencer en disant comment j'ai été impressionné avec tout ce que vous avez dit, avec la passion que tu as apportée. It was amazing. Okay, thank you very much. That was very inspiring. I have friends that lost homes in Fort McMurray. I worked with Syncrude once upon a time through a nonprofit. But what I want to share with everyone that's here, and there's probably 200 people, is that despite everything that seems to be going wrong, we actually have solutions. We actually have solutions. The problem is the government. So I'm going to ask my partner, Fakir, to stand up. Fakir has, for 25 years, had multiple patents on chemical membranes. He's a genius. I'm going to get him the Nobel Prize. But what I want to tell you is that he and I, as partners, are doing two things. We're taking the problem of landfills, which is a post-colonial problem, where you have methane emitting out of the soil and leachates. Oh, I'm sorry. So the question is simply, do you see for yourself hope for the future, or are you now drawn more into the negativity of the pessimism that is abound, like you said, the analogy with Trump?
I don't see Trump is sort of a speed bump to get over, and so is petroleum, and I just would like to first state my solidarity for what you and your comrade there are working on, and I wouldn't be here if I wasn't hopeful. It's when you look what Homo sapiens have been through. Look at all the endings we've been through. Look at all the losses we've suffered. Everyone in this room is descended from somebody who got blown out of somewhere else in some really painful way. Something ended dramatically for them, often traumatically. That's why we're here. And we're the survivors of that. And we can do this. I really have no doubt. You know, I'm a father, I'm a parent, and I absolutely have hope. And I really wouldn't be bothering to sit here. But I think how I deal with my fear and anxiety is to really go into the thing that's scaring me and really try to come to grips with it. But I'm also astounded by what people know, what people are able to do, what people are able to invent and conceive of. And just the idea of South Dakota, man, getting, you know, more than 3/4 of its energy, electricity, from renewables. You know, nobody thought about that in the 50s. You know, look how, I mean, it feels too slow right now. And it is too slow for a lot of species and certain types of stability that we really count on. But it is happening. And that is really exciting to me. You know, somehow I can hold both, and that is what humans do. You know, we're able to hold fear and manage fear and somehow go on and be brave for our families. And so that's the short answer is yes, and in part because of people like you. So, and then other people who are in this room who are forging ahead, and it is rugged out there. So we need each other. I mean, that's our superpower. It isn't fossil fuels. It's our capacity for community and invention. And that's super exciting to me. I mean, the renewable energy in this room is staggering. Really. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question over here. Thank you.
Thank you. This is kind of a question for both the president and you. Roller roads exist in an urban forest in the middle of an urban Colwood city. And one of the things that those of us who love Colwood and love Royal Roads are very concerned about is, in fact, if a fire would begin in those woods.
Yeah.
So my two-part question is, what advice would you give? And second question is, has Royal Roads, First Nations, and the City of Colwood developed a plan for fire suppression in those wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woods?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You might imagine that every season that this is an issue which preoccupies us, and we do work very closely with the City of Colwood, and we do work with the Songhees and the Esquimalt on a plan, but the truth is things are changing so quickly and so rapidly that I think we probably need to think about something quite different in terms of our planning each year. You had mentioned the wildlife, the wildfire urban interface. We held what we called a pop-up university with students, high school students, grade 11 and 12, with the fire chief from Colwood to talk exactly about this issue. And through a day, bringing experts in and working with kids who were in the high school system and then going out into post-secondary later to think about how you would manage these issues and what the issues were. But it's an excellent question, and I can tell you, last summer it kept me awake. I thought about that. I thought about the incredible vulnerability we have, many of us have, in this community. You mentioned the West End in Vancouver too, with Stanley Park. When you see Stanley Park aerially now, and all the trees that have died, all the fuel sitting there, and they're just some extraordinary things. I know Sonia Festino is in the audience, and she's been calling for a fire ban right now, which we don't yet have a fire ban, right?
Wow.
In BC. So we just have to think differently because it's not the old normal there. But John.
You've been. I think there probably are Indigenous fire keepers in the vicinity, and we need to talk to them, and we also need to talk to our fire departments. And so I think there is, especially out here, there's some sweet spot between Indigenous knowledge about how to manage fire in this part of the world, including prescribed burns, traditional burning practices, plus the Fire Smart program, which every fire department has in Canada. And these are really earnest people, firefighters, who will come to your home, come to your cul-de-sac, and look it over with you, and just everybody in this room can reduce their chances of getting burned over by double-digit percentages very, very easily. And it's really just first having to think about that fire does not do the things we used to think it does. It does different things now in our space. And that, everybody in Fort McMurray was blindsided by that, and you can see why. And so, but that we really have to learn from them and realize this can happen here too, even though the humidity is much higher here, but we do have hot, dry summers. But I think that this is an opportunity to get to know your firefighters, get to know your forest, get to know about Indigenous forest and fire knowledge, which is deep and old and around us. And so the upside to this new risk that can feel fearful and claustrophobic is it's really an opportunity to get to know your world and its inhabitants better. And that's the invitation. I'm trying to think, what are we being invited to do here? Rather than what are we being terrified into? How do you sort of push back on that and sort of try to see this as an opening? And I'm not being Pollyanna. There's a lot we don't know about our forest. There's a lot we don't know about Indigenous forest and fire knowledge. And there's also a lot we don't know about our firefighters, even though we depend on them. We really want them to be at the end of the phone. But how many people here know their local firefighters who really are thinking about this 24/7?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and thank you for that question. In fact, we've got a board retreat. Our Board of Governors has a retreat coming up in May, and we have Ken Elliott, who's an indigenous ethnobotanist who's going to be taking the board through the forest to talk about the forest and that kind of understanding.
Yeah.
But it's a very good reminder to us this year, and having heard your presentation, to probably start thinking differently about how we might handle a threat there. I'm going to ask Jennifer, because she's been collecting questions from the audience, if you could ask a question on behalf of the audience members.
Thank you. There are a lot to choose from, so I'll try to be fair. This question asks, have there been any reactions to the book from the oil and gas sector or individual business people?
Wow, yeah, that's, I've been wondering about that. It's been very quiet in Alberta. And I know people are reading it there, and, you know, this wasn't a screed against the petroleum industry. You know, it's a different kind. I knew, once I got to know people in Fort McMurray, I became, you know, I really cared about them, you know, so I wanted to treat them well and carefully. And a lot of them have this book. A number of them said, you know, I'd like to have a copy, but I'm probably not going to read it because I just don't want to go through it again. It's just too painful. And I think for the petroleum industry, they really don't want to deal with this. And predatory delay is a real thing. And they are deeply invested in it. And I think they understand. I mean, already demand is changing. So petroleum industry is leaning much more on plastics now because demand for gas is, at least in certain areas, is dropping. And they're, you know, repositioning themselves, but have no intention of stopping. And they've been really clear about that over the past year. You know, they were agreeing, you know, how big is your carbon footprint? Look what you're doing, da 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 da. Constant, you know, gaslighting and offloading, and really, so they don't want to engage with this. And I've heard from folks, you know, in the book who work for Syncrude and Suncor. There was sort of, you know, how might there be some way we can sort of engage, but it's too, the money's too good. And so you're not going to see any change. We can't wait for them. We can't wait for them. And we really have to move around them and move forward. And so that's discouraging. But on the other hand, no one's tried to take me down either, and that's interesting. That's really interesting. So, I mean, I get the occasional troll on Twitter. I'm quite active on Twitter, but there's been very surprisingly little hostility of that kind. So I feel like I'm in this sort of static place where on the one hand it, you know, feels, I could go on and on about it and I don't want to, but it's weird. It's a weird situation, and that's unresolved.
So you're still waiting for your call from Premier Daniel Smith.
That's right. I am waiting. I am so here, you know.
Jennifer, maybe another one from the audience submitted questions.
Thank you. What is the most important thing we can do as individuals to make an impact on climate change?
Oh, an easy one. Well, honestly, you know, I bet that person knows the answer, but your community, I mean, you have a lot more power in community than you do by yourself. What is it that you want for your community? And then who do you know who knows how to help you make that happen? And, you know, if you're trying to get Royal Roads solar powered, you know, there's got to be some solar engineers around here somewhere. There's got to be some people with connections to the solar panel industry around here. There's got to be some grant money or something else around here. How do we get this together in a meaningful way? And I don't know what's meaningful to the person who asked the question, but it's really getting clear on what feels urgent for you. Maybe, like what some people want, this guy in Harrison Hot Springs, all he wants is a second road, a second escape road from Harrison Hot Springs, because right now it's one road in, one road out, and if that road gets blocked by fire, it's a fire trap, and everybody in there is going to burn up. So he wants another road. And that's a reasonable thing to ask for. And there's a really good case to be made for getting that road. And so a lot of it's getting clear on what you want, and then finding like-minded people who want the same thing. And trouble is, it takes time, because we have our dry cleaning. We have, and I'm not being sarcastic. We got stuff we want to do today. And this is another thing. It's a whole nother thing. So part of it is like, God damn, I guess I'm going to make time for this. And maybe it's going to be 2 hours on the weekend, or maybe it's going to be the rest of my life. But, getting clear with yourself about what that is.
And maybe I'll just take the opportunity for a bit of a plug for Aurora Roads. We've got faculty and students here from the School of Environment and Sustainability who are doing remarkable work in this area, work which could always use extra support. And the Cascade Institute, too, we have researchers here. I think Rebecca Pierce is here doing incredible work on looking at the potential for ultra-deep geothermal, which is a hugely exciting area. Yeah. We're probably leading in this space in the country right now.
Wow.
So, and I know there are many other people in this room doing all kinds of interesting work. So connect yourselves in some way and create that kind of community, and I think there's incredible power there. Questions in the audience? I think up here we have a question. Thank you.
The graph back in about 1870 showed a spike in temperature, and then it went back down. I'm just wondering what that was.
There's natural fluctuation. I mean, this is the thing, is we're in a natural system that changes. Climate, this is, the kind of climate deniers playbook is, well, the climate's always changing. That is absolutely true. But it has never changed like this because of industrial CO2. This is a new kind of a thing. So you're getting these natural fluctuations that are now increasingly buried inside this forcing. But you're still going to get those fluctuations, though the forcing is skewing that. And this is where the science of feedback, and it's it's way above my pay grade. But there's no question that, and there's also so much more CO2 and methane in the atmosphere than there was in 1870. I mean, it really was a much more normal, stable climate back then. And we've really, just in our lifetimes, have skewed things so radically. And that's, again, we're in clima incognita. And again, there were, as you know, I'm sure, as everyone here knows, there's always natural fluctuation, but it's now you're getting this double whammy of natural fluctuation, maybe an El Nino here or whatever, on top of this extra heating. And so that empowers the El Nino to do things. And again, think of, 33 Celsius, not that big of a deal. 11% humidity, not that big of a deal. You put them together, add boreal forest, add a 2-year drought with an El Nino, and all of a sudden you got a nuclear-powered forest fire. And so that's kind of what we're unleashing, kind of what we're dabbling with right now through our amazing capacity for invention and burning fossil fuels.
Thank you. Audience questions here. Thank you.
Thank you for that call out, Philip. The truth is, no one does anything alone, and I've been supported and emboldened by lots of amazing people, including many who are in this room. But sort of following the note of climate deniers, as a master of communication, how do you reach the demographic of people who are not receptive or willing to hear about issues on climate and motivate them to become advocates of change?
No. Next question. You know who I think is better at that? Catherine Hayhoe. I think she's Canadian also. Yeah, she's an amazing, really, that you need to get her to come and speak if you haven't already. I would love to hear her. So she's an evangelical Christian, I think, who talks about climate change. And so she has a language and a framework to go into communities that are otherwise quite defended and quite insular. And she has a way in there. And And I think there are people, there's a lot of common sense in fire weather that I think people are able to engage with privately. And there's a kind of public persona. And, you know, I met a bunch of people up in Fort McMurray who vote for Danielle Smith. I almost called her Danielle Steele. And yet, if you get them alone, like Rebecca, if you and you know, this guy sat down and had a conversation about heat and CO2 and energy, I think you would have a meeting of the minds. I don't think you would be butting heads or end in a big argument. And so, you know, there are these kind of, I do think there's a sort of dark genius to partisan politics that's sort of able to bring out the worst in people and intimidate them a bit to against being rational. And I think most people are pretty rational and do respond to evidence. And then it's, you know, the peer pressure and what are other people going to think, and is this going to compromise my job? You know, if I do a climate protest in the middle of Fort McMurray, it's not going to go over well. And so, and they're laying off people right and left, and I don't want to be the next one, you know. I don't want to be the next sucker. So, so there's so many reasons we regulate ourselves. And so I also don't, well, anyway, that's a really long, that's a whole seminar that I would like to be a student of. I'm not leading that one.
I think, you know, these crises, and the folks at the Cascade Institute look at this, the way in which the climate crisis, the political crisis, the financial crisis, the health crisis kind of intersect, and they feed on each other and they transform each other. But we see an incredible polarization in this country right now. And so finding ways to talk to each other, I think, is very important, and not dismissing those other views. We have a faculty member at Royal Roads, David Black, and he said, you need to take a walk in the wilderness. And by that he means you need to go and talk to that person in Fort McMurray. You know, not mock them, not say that they are stupid, because they're not.
Right? And also not bring your own conclusions and biases, even if they're right. You might have the right bias, but it still isn't going to be helpful there. And so there's this whole period, I think, of sort of just listening that's got to go on. And it's got to go both ways. And I do think we can find common ground, and then you slowly cantilever out from those common interests. And the common interests, like, boy, we sure need a second road out of this new development, because there's only one road in. And so we can all agree we need an escape road. And so that might be just as an example, something you could work on together. And then you have this solidarity and trust and this mutual interest, but it really takes time. And prior to going to Fort McMurray, I hadn't taken any time to go to Fort McMurray or understand petroleum people, but I had really strong feelings about petroleum people, you know? And that is just, it's a liability. It just gets in the way. And so this book is, among other things, was sort of an opportunity to really look at the baggage that I'm bringing into it and the colored lenses that I've already got on. And they're not helpful, mostly. However comforting and right they may feel, they aren't useful in terms of actually making connections with people. And that's, again, the bottom line, and that is the superpower, is our capacity to connect and then build these sort of nodes of common interest out from that. And it really takes time, though. And it's really hard when people are working at cross purposes, skilled partisan politicians. And that is a tough one, and not everybody's up for that.
John, I know we are over time here, so I would ask folks if you could hold your questions. We're going to have an opportunity after this session here. John's going to do some book signing, and you'll have an opportunity to meet with John at the registration desk. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you all for coming out tonight. It's so great to see such a great audience here, and for your interest and your commitment on these issues as well. I want to thank the Royal Roads University staff who've done a great job, as always, in bringing this together, the folks from Roll Focus who helped us with the video, and the media sponsor, the Times Colonist. We're going to have more Changemakers Speaker Series events in the future, so please visit our website and follow our website and social channels, and you'll see details there. But again, John, just wanted to thank you for an incredibly stimulating talk tonight. Thank you so much.